Okay, so you want to play e4, e5, but you're worried. You're worried about all the gambits your opponent's going to play. The Scotch Gambit, the Danish Gambit, the Vienna Gambit, the King's Gambit, and gambits you never heard of, like the Bowden-Gritsky Gambit. What the hell is that? We're going to come to it. And so instead of playing e4, e5, you spend what feels like a lifetime playing the French defense, or the Scandinavian, or the Sicilian, or even worse, the Caro Khan. And now you look like this guy. The life has been sucked out of him because he faced 1 million advanced variations of the Caro Khan targeting a backward d4 pawn. And you're thinking, enough's enough, guys. I am just going to put a pawn in the center and play the open game. And my opponent can just bring it. And so in this video, rather than focus on grandmaster lines, which you're never going to see, and to be honest, I don't really see either, we're going to focus on the major moves that white can make according to the Lee Chess database. So we're going to focus on the online game, Blitz Rapid mostly, and give you the key ideas about how to tackle them. And what you're going to hear me say throughout this video is play d5, not immediately, but what you'll find is that when white tries things, they're often neglecting the center and they're giving you the opportunity to play d5. And so there is less memorization involved here than you think. So let's get to it. Timestamps in the description below if you want to jump around. Okay, so let's start with the King's Gambit, steeped in history. That is, of course, e4, e5, followed by f4. You're going to face this a lot at the amateur level, and you know what to do here. Play d6, decline the whole thing. No way, guys. We decline nothing on this channel. E takes f4, we accept. King's Gambit accepted. And now most probably your opponent's going to play knight f3. And in this position, I'm going to say try this line, knight f6, which is known as the Schalop or Scallop defense. I don't know how to pronounce it. It is recommended by Grandmaster Jan Gustafsson in his e4, e5 chessboard course. He was a second to Magnus Carlsen. And in this position, we're obviously targeting this e4 pawn, which is hanging. So you're going to face one of two probable moves, either e5 or knight c3. So let's go into it. It's very easy to deal with. e5 looks a bit annoying, but we're going to send our knight to the edge, which is absolutely fine in this variation. We are looking after our f4 pawn, and in this position your opponent is most probably going to play d4. And now, the first of many times in this video, I'm going to say play this move d5, strike in the center. And if your opponent wants to en passant, we're going to play bishop takes d6. We have double protection of our pawn, and that's an easier game. Most probably in this position, your opponent is going to develop the bishop or play c4. Okay, so if the opponent plays the move bishop b5 check, we play c6, we kick it away. The idea for the rest of the moves here are simple. If your opponent plays bishop e2 or bishop d3 or c4, we are going to play g5 with a threat of playing g4. And that's going to be a big problem if we get queen h4 check in, dislodging this knight. And so as an illustration, if your opponent plays the move c4, we're going to go ahead and play the move g5. And here the most popular move in the Lee Chess database is takes. And now g4 is just completely winning for black. The engine doesn't even want you to move this knight, because if you move this knight, say, over to d2, queen h4 check is just completely deadly. And so it is very easy to deal with this e5 push from white. The most popular move in the Lee Chess database is actually knight c3, and here we're going to play our key move, d5. And here what they should do is pretty much take and takes, and you're just going to have a normal game. But the most popular move in the Lee Chess database is, you guessed it, e5, which is losing. It's about -1.5 on the engine. And now we send our knight to the edge again. And in this position, you're most probably going to play d4. And instead of playing g5 immediately, for some reason, the engine wants you to play knight c6 and put pressure here on this backward-looking d4 pawn. And in this position, the idea is again simple. We are going to try and play g5 followed by g4. If your opponent plays bishop e2, we go with g5, bishop d3, g5. And this carries an extra problem, because if we get g4 in and this knight moves, then there is nothing guarding this d4 pawn. If in this position your opponent plays the move bishop b5, we go ahead and play a6. And if they takes, don't be afraid to play g5 in this position. Keep your black king in the center. The engine is absolutely fine with that. If they retreat, we need to go ahead and play this move bishop e6. And the reason for that is we need to stop the move e6 and getting the knight here, which allows the knight to get to e5, and put a lot of pressure on this knight, which is currently pinned. And so it is very easy to deal with the King's Gambit if you play this move knight f6 and then pick your moment to play the move d5. Okay, so the next thing on my list is the Danish Gambit, very popular online. That is, of course, e4, e5, followed by the move d4. We take. They're most probably going to play this move c3. And they've been Googling, YouTubing some line where you take, and they're going to put a bishop on b2, a bishop on c4, and they're going to have these monster bishops staring down the board. But we're not going to allow any of this, because we're going to play this early queen move, queen e7. And you're like, whoa, light squares. I don't do early queen moves anymore. My days of all that is over. All that stuff you listen to online is not to be taken religiously, guys. There are occasions where early queen moves are good. You can download Stockfish and check it. It really likes this move. And in this position, we are attacking this e4 pawn. But importantly, we are x-raying the white king, which is, you're going to see, is going to be useful because it allows us to play this key move d5, which will become clear in a second. So in this position, if they decide to take, we have queen takes e4, check. And now they're most probably going to play this move bishop e3. We're going to have bishop b4 check. And in this position, they're going to play knight c3. And your queen is safe for the time being because there is a pin on this knight. But you just have to be careful that when that knight is unpinned, you don't hang your queen. So quite easy to play this move, this line, excuse me, if they decide to take here on d4. What I generally find is that most players are afraid of the queen advancing up the board like that. And so they go ahead and try to protect this pawn by playing the move bishop d3, which is the most popular move in the Lichess database. And in this position, you know what to do, guys. Play this move d5. And this pawn is completely pinned. It cannot take because you're eyeing up the white king. And here, if you advance the pawn, obviously you're just hanging it. And so the line is very easy from here. It doesn't matter what white does in this position. You are just simply going to take on e4. So for example, if they play c takes d4, we just take here on e4. The bishop has to retreat. We just play chess. In this position, if they play f3, we just take. And after takes, we play something like knight c6. We just play chess. If in this position, they play queen e2, which is the most popular move in the Lichess database, then it's already a -1.5, -2 situation according to the engine. Not easy to convert, but you're completely winning. Because after takes, and they're most probably going to play bishop takes e4, knight f6, the bishop's got to move. You have two candidate moves here to investigate, bishop g4 and knight c6. You could take, but then you're just helping your opponent to develop. And why would we do this? There's no rush here for a queen exchange. But if they want to go down the queen exchange path, let them, you're just up a pawn. Okay, so the third thing on my list is the Vienna Gambit on the screen right now. How do we get here? We have e4, e5, knight c3, which is the Vienna game. Now we have knight f6, and the gambit begins when white plays this move f4. And so before we go down how to deal with this, let's put the Lichess database up on the screen right now and give a shout out to the Vienna Gambit. Maybe this is something you should be playing with the white pieces. You can see this position has been reached almost 6 million times in the database. And at the bottom of the screen here, white has this very impressive win record of 57%. However, if you look carefully, and black plays accurately against white and plays the key move here, you know what that is? Of course, d5, third most popular here on the table. Then the odds of winning even out. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. It's a good move. And so after d5, you're going to face one of two probable moves. You're going to face either e takes d5, and then we're going to have knight takes d5, and maybe in this position, white should be playing knight takes d5. However, you get a lot of material hungry people that play this move f takes e5. And now, although the position is roughly equal, it's just going to get very awkward for white. Why is that? Because we're going to send this king for a walk. Because after knight takes c3, it doesn't matter which way they take, we are going to play queen h4 check. So if they play b takes c3, we're going to play queen h4 check. And because you do your tactics puzzle the whole time, you know that they can't play g3. Because after queen e4 check, they lost the rook. So instead, they have to play this move. And okay, the engine says it's playable. But as a human, do you really want to play this position? So that's what happens after e takes d5. Most probably you're going to face f takes e5. And now we're going to take back here on e4 with our knight. And here, most probably you're going to face queen f3. And here, try this move knight c6. There might be multiple moves. And here, if your opponent plays bishop b5, then we're going to play knight takes c3. And we're just going to have a normal game. However, many players actually take this knight on e4, which is not losing. However, what you can then do is try this move knight to d4. And this attacks the queen. And we're going to capture the knight on our next move because obviously they're going to move the queen. And note, you also have attack here on this c2 pawn and attack on the rook. And I can tell you that if you open up the Lichess database, the most popular move in this position is a complete blunder. Queen d3. It's about -5 on the engine. They're going to lose either their queen or their rook, which I'll show you why in a second. What they really need to be playing is queen c3. And you think, well, what's the difference between these two? It'll become clear in a second. So after queen d3, which is a complete blunder, we can take the knight. So we got our material back. And in this position, the knight is hanging. Excuse me, the queen is hanging. And you're like, oh, that's just a free pawn. No, it's not, guys. You do your tactics puzzle the whole time. Bishop f5. Double attack now here on c2. And white is just completely busted here. White could try some counterplay with queen takes b7, but we have rook b8. And black is completely winning. So instead of taking the pawn here, White could try this move queen c3, protecting the c2 pawn. Doesn't work because of bishop b4, an important pattern to learn when you have a knight on d4, queen on c3. You can move your bishop here to b4. It looks like you're hanging it. You're not, of course, because after knight takes c2, you've just won the queen. And so in this position, very desperate now for white, they could try queen c4, but they lost their queen altogether after bishop e6. And so the reason I like to play this move knight c6 in this position is because you have many people that play this move knight takes e4, and then you can delay recapturing by playing this move knight d4 and try to entice this blunder. Okay, so the fourth thing on my list is the bishop's opening. And so after e4, e5, the bishop's opening begins with this move bishop c4. Notice the e5 pawn is not being attacked, so there's no rush to play knight c6. But the e4 pawn is hanging, so we can go and force white to make some decisions. We have knight f6 here, attacking the e4 pawn. And the game can veer off in one of two directions. Either white tries to defend it, which is quite boring, or they can play a move like knight f3, in which case we're going to go down most probably gambity paths. And so let's say they defend it with this move d3. We're most probably going to transpose into Italian game lines. We're going to have knight c6, knight f3, bishop c5, d6, and I'll talk about the Italian game a little bit later. Alternatively, in this position, they could defend the pawn by playing this move knight c3, and here maybe c6, d5 is something to investigate. However, I just like to play knight c6 in this position for the simple reason that if they play knight f3, which is a board configuration that's been reached almost 27 million times in the Lead Chess database, this is dubious for white, because we can just go ahead and take this pawn on e4 anyway. Because after knight takes e4, we can fork the knight and bishop with our special move d5. And many players here just give up the light square bishop. They don't need to. I'll show you why in a second. And it's about -1 on the engine after queen takes d5. Alternatively, they could play bishop to d3, and now after takes, and say bishop d6, we just have a normal game of chess from here on in. It's about 0 on the engine. More exciting stuff happens if in this position after knight f6, white avoids protecting this e4 pawn and just plays this move knight to f3, and now we're just going to take. And if they decide to take here on e5 and attacking this f7 pawn, which looks pretty scary, we're going to play our special move, of course. It is d5, and it's just normal chess from here on in. The bishop's got to move. Alternatively, in this position, there is something known as the Ponziani Gambit, where white plays this move knight to c3. We take, and this is known, sometimes referred to as a reverse Stafford Gambit. Here you just have to remember to play this move f6. It's absolutely critical that you prevent knight to g5. If you defend this e4 pawn by playing this move, e5 pawn by playing this move d6, then you lost. Because after knight to g5, there is a double attack here on this f7 pawn. And you may think bishop e6 is a defense. It doesn't work, because after bishop takes e6, f takes e6, queen f3 wins the game. And now there is a threat of mates here, and white is also threatening to pick up your rook here via this b7 pawn. You try to defend all of that. It doesn't really work. After queen takes b7, let's say you think queen c6 defends everything. It doesn't work, because now you just hung mate. You do your tactics puzzle the whole time. Queen c8 check, the king's got to move. Another check, king has one legal move, and now of course knight f7 is checkmate. Okay, so the fifth thing on my list is the Scotch game, very popular online. How do we get here? We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now d4. The Scotch game begins. We're going to take on d4, and most probably you're going to have knight takes d4, and we're going to play something called a Schmidt variation, knight f6, attacking this e4 pawn, and they're probably going to take here on c6, and after takes, if they play something like e5, we can play queen e7. There is a pin here. The knight cannot be taken. If they play queen e2, knight d5, normal chess from here on in. Instead, in this position, many players are just going to defend the e4 pawn by developing, playing this move knight c3. And now you know how to develop with tempo, is of course to play this move bishop b4. And now the knight is hanging again. The pawn is hanging again because the knight is pinned. And so they play bishop d3. And here we play our special move d5. And in this position, many will take. And here you can just go ahead and castle. The engine completely approves. And really, white should be castling. However, many players are going to take this pawn on c6. And now after rook e8 check, although the position is technically equal, it's very difficult for white to defend. King f1 is a candidate move. Many players are going to play this move bishop to e3, blocking the check. Now we're going to have knight to g4 maybe. And here there is a double attack on this bishop, which is pinned for the time being. Maybe you have queen d2, and in this position we're going to take anyway. And now obviously they have to take with their f pawn. We're going to play queen h4 check. If they play g3, we're going to play queen h5. And now, does white really want to castle this way? And it's illegal for white to castle this way. And if they play something like bishop to e2, we can of course bring our bishop into the game. And so you're in a very comfortable position when you have struck in the center with d5. An alternative way the Scotch game could go is that after takes on d4, they could play something called a Scotch Gambit, where they play bishop to c4. And here, you could play either bishop b4 or knight f6. These are roughly equal moves and played at the top level. Here, I like this move knight to f6, because they're most probably going to play this move e5. And in this position, you play our key move again, of course, d5. If they take, we're going to have bishop takes d6. We have a normal game of chess. And in this position, the bishop is hanging. If they decide to take the knight, we take the bishop. We're in a completely winning position. According to Stockfish, it's about -3 on the engine. They're most probably going to move their bishop here to b5. And now knight to d7, knight to e4 are candidate moves. I like this move, knight to e4. They take this pawn here on d4, so they get their material back. We play bishop d7. And from here on in, it's just a normal game of chess. If they decide to take the knight, we have b takes c6, and the bishop's got to move. And so we've completely neutralized this gambit. Okay, so the sixth thing on my list is the Ponziani opening, getting very popular online now. And so how do we get here? We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now the Ponziani opening begins with this move c3. And we're going to play our special move here. White is neglecting the center, so we can just strike here with this move d5. And you have one of three probable moves here. If they decide to take here on d5, we're going to have queen takes d5, and it's absolutely fine to bring your queen out early on. The c3 square is occupied, so white cannot develop here with tempo in normal variations, and so this is a very comfortable position to deal with. In this position, for some reason, many players play this move d4, and now this just hangs a pawn in my opinion. So we have d takes e4, and many players don't want to take because after a queen exchange, they're just down a pawn. Really, the testing line in this position after d5 is for white to play this move queen a4, and now this knight is pinned, and the pawn on e5 is hanging. And you could play bishop d7, but then you're just hanging this d5 pawn. Instead, here, a very strong move is just f6. Benjamin Feingold says never play f6, but there are exceptions. Here, f6 is a very good move, and it's just normal chess from here on in. If they play something like bishop b5, doubling their attack on this knight, we can go ahead and play this move, knight on g to e7. I've never really had a problem with this opening. Okay, so the seventh thing on my list is the Ruy Lopez, very famous, loved by grandmasters, steeped in history. And so how do we get here? We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Spanish game begins. And so I don't really have a settled opinion on how to deal with this. It seems as though there are many good lines. And so you can look into things like the Berlin defense with knight f6, maybe the Schirmer with f5 if you're feeling adventurous. Knight on g to e7, which is the cozier defense. You could go with the Morphy defense, which is what I like to play. And in this position, if they decide to play the exchange Ruy, then after bishop takes c6, d takes c6, they obviously can't take this pawn here on e5 because queen d4 just wins the pawn back. The knight is completely hanging here, and white is in a slightly losing position. Instead, in this position, many players will castle, and here I just recommend this move bishop to g4. And if they try to kick the bishop away, just play this move h5, and they can't take. And this is a very difficult position for white to deal with, because if they decide to take, then after takes here on g4, this knight can't move. Let's say they take this pawn here on e5, there's no stopping mate after queen to h4. And so this is a very nice line to try if you go down exchange Ruy pass. Many players in this position are just going to move their bishop back, and here you could go down some of the main lines, martial attack stuff. But I like to try this sideline called the Norwegian variation in the Morphy, where you just play b5 in this position, the bishop's got to move, and now we have knight to a5 attacking this bishop, and it looks like you're hanging this pawn. The most popular move in the Lee chess database, what a lot of amateurs do is just they take this pawn, and it's not a free pawn, because although there is a double attack here on this f7 pawn, we can obviously remove that attack by playing this move knight to takes b3, a takes b3, and now the key move here is queen to g5. And in this position, the g2 pawn is hanging, the knight is hanging. Maybe the knight should go back, but most players in this position are going to play d4. And after queen takes g2, the rook is hanging, the e4 pawn is hanging. There's only one way to save them both, which is queen f3. And after takes, we reached a position whereby we have a queenless middle game where black has the bishop pair. If you turn on the engine, black is slightly winning, and you can take it from here. It's down to your chess. Okay, so the eighth and final thing on my list is the Italian game, probably the most common line you'll face. And how do we get here? We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now bishop c4. And now you could do boring stuff by playing this move, bishop c5 immediately, but you can go for fireworks by playing this move, knight to f6, and invite white to play this move, knight to g5, which you've heard me talk about in other videos. And so this move is actually recommended by Jan Gustafsson in his course again, e4, e5 on Chessable. You can go ahead and check it out. So it's played at the top level. There's nothing dubious about this. And after knight to g5, the knight attack begins. We're going to play our special move. You know what that is. It's d5. And here, when they take, there was a double attack here on this f7 pawn, remember. The important thing to do is not to take here on d5. Because if you take, then you're going to have knight takes f7. And the fried liver attack is going to begin. Instead, a more principled thing to do is to send the knight to the edge of the board with knight to a5. And now the bishop is hanging. You're most probably going to have bishop b5 check, c6, takes, the bishop is hanging. And I can tell you the most common move in the lead chess database is bishop to a4. And here white is in a losing position, albeit slightly, because after h6, the knight retreats, e4, knight e5, queen d4 practically wins the game because you are forking this material and you can't save them both. If you have something like bishop takes c6, then we have knight takes c6, knight takes c6, and after queen c5, the knight has nowhere to go. And if white tries to be clever in this position and plays this move knight to c6, then obviously knight takes c6 is a blunder because you're going to lose your rook. So in this position, we just go ahead and take the bishop, and white is just down material. So I have some videos about the knight attack. You can dig them out. There's tons to learn here, but it is one of the most fun lines to play in e4, e5 games. Instead, in this position, your opponent could do more boring stuff and play this move d3. And this is played at the top level, and you're going to have to go out onto YouTube and learn tons and tons of stuff about the Italian game. There's loads of moves here. However, the setup we're going to go for is to put a bishop on c5 and play d6 and maybe delay castling. And I'll explain why in a second. So after bishop c5, many players will be reluctant to play d6 because they're worried about some pin here on g5, but that's actually a dubious move, and you can actually play a famous queen sacrifice, which I've done a number of times now, and I'll show you how. And so in this position, the most popular move is castle. You can go ahead and play d6 and invite this pin. Grandmasters don't play that move, but players at the amateur level do. And so after bishop g5, we can play h6, and in this position, the engine wants you to give up the bishop pair. However, many players are going to go back. We're going to play g5. They're going to move again, and here you can just go ahead and hang this pawn and threaten to trap this bishop. And it looks like you're going to be in a completely losing position because after knight to g5, h4, knight takes f7, it looks like you're going to lose the queen. But this is a famous sacrifice in the Italian game. You can go ahead and give up this queen. The engine evaluation is 0, and white is going to have to return the queen. And most people don't realize this, and as a result are going to get checkmated, and I'm going to show you how. And so in this position, after h takes g3, spectacular. They're obviously going to play this move, knight takes d8. And here in this position, you can go ahead and play bishop to g4. The queen is hanging, they move it. And now we're going to play knight to d4. And let's say, for example, they're not paying attention. They play some move like knight c3. Then they basically hung mate. Because after knight f3 check, where is this king going to go? If they do this, then of course, rook h2 is checkmate. So they take. But after bishop takes f3, there's no stopping mate. We're going to take this pawn and then deliver mate here on h1. And even if they move it, we're still going to deliver mate. And you can go and study this on your own. But the only way for white to handle the situation is to delay mate by just delivering nonsense checks and hanging the queen. And it doesn't work. So mate is inevitable in this position. Alternatively, if they decide to play some move like f3, for example, then we have double check here on e2. The knight is delivering a check and the bishop is delivering a check. And of course, the king has to move. And rook takes h2 is checkmate. There is a way to defend against all this for white, which is in this position just to play this move h3. And now you can study this on your own. Knight f3 is just a huge blunder. But what black needs to play is this move knight to e2 check. And if they move here, then what you're going to have is rook takes h3, g takes h3, and now bishop f3 checkmate. And so what they needed to do in this position was take this knight on e2, and that's why the engine evaluation was 0, because white had to return the queen, which I can tell you most people are not going to do. They're not going to realize that they're going to get checkmated in this position. And that's a lovely position to end this video on, where white is plus 12 in material, but white has been checkmated. So there you go, guys. Getting started with e4, e5. Hopefully that's been fun and educational, not overwhelming. You can see that it's not as much memorization as you thought. In many of these side lines, trappy lines, gambity lines, you're looking for this move d5, striking the center when white is neglecting it, and that will help you to control the game. And for this reason, maybe this is why the Ruy Lopez and Italian game is played so much at the top level, because it's actually difficult to play d5 in those major openings. You have to make a whole bunch of preparation moves first. Thank you very much for your time.